Last night, the US and Israel launched large-scale combat operations against the ruling regime of Iran, with air and missile strikes targeting senior Iranian officials and military assets all across the nation, starting at roughly 1:15 a.m. Eastern Time, or about 9:15 a.m. in Tehran. Now, multiple sources are reporting that Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, seems to have been among those killed in these strikes. Now, the initial wave of American attacks came in the form of ship-launched BGM-109 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles alongside as-yet undisclosed air-launched weapons, deployed from both U.S. Air Force and carrier-based U.S. Navy strike fighters. The attack comes just days after negotiations between the U.S. and Iran over Tehran's nuclear program, and follows months of large-scale protests across Iran against the nation's Islamist regime. Now, those protests were brutally suppressed by the government, with some estimates of the dead now exceeding 30,000. President Trump has stated that the objectives for this offensive are to eliminate imminent threats to the United States and its allies, but the overarching goal seems to be nothing short of complete regime change, with the president himself calling for the Iranian people to take over their government. Now, Iran has responded with ballistic missiles and drone strikes across the region, many of which have been reported intercepted, but footage surfacing online suggests some are certainly getting through American and allied air defenses. And as the fog of war envelops the Middle East once again, it seems clear that last night's strikes were just the beginning. So, let's talk about the US and Israeli offensive against Iran, what we know so far, and what we should be looking out for in the days ahead. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is a breaking edition of Firepower. Oh, hey, wait, no ad to skip today. Just me asking you to click subscribe down below. It's not a big deal for you, but it has a huge impact on my end, and it allows me to keep doing the type of work that I love to do. So if you could be so kind as to click that button, I will do my best to make it worth your while. And as always, I appreciate you being here. Thanks. In a video posted late last night, President Trump announced the beginning of this new offensive, dubbed Operation Epic Fury, outlining nearly a half-century of Iranian aggression in remarks that culminated with renewed concerns about Iran's efforts to develop and field viable nuclear weapons. I will quote the president directly now. "They've rejected every opportunity to renounce their nuclear ambitions, and we can't take it anymore. Instead, they attempted to rebuild their nuclear program and to continue developing long-range missiles that can now threaten our very good friends and allies in Europe, our troops stationed overseas, and could soon reach the American homeland. Just imagine how emboldened this regime would be if they ever had and actually were armed with nuclear weapons as a means to deliver their message." Now, according to U.S. Central Command, the initial wave of strikes targeted Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps command and control facilities, Iranian air defense capabilities, missile and drone launch sites, and military airfields. And that all makes a ton of sense. Crippling command and control would inhibit a well-organized Iranian response, while taking out air defense assets and airfields will both improve the survivability and the efficacy of follow-on airstrikes. Now, according to that same CENTCOM statement, American forces have already defended against hundreds of Iranian missile and drone strikes launched in response, with no casualties reported at this time. American forces have been building up in the region for weeks now, with the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group arriving just this week to join the USS Abraham Lincoln carrier strike group that's already in the region. It's been estimated that roughly 1/3 of the Navy's deployable surface fleet is now operating in and around the Middle East, including those 2 supercarriers, at least 8 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, and 3 additional littoral combat ships. Now, each of those destroyers carries its own arsenal of vertical-launched missiles and interceptors, including long-range land attack cruise missiles like the Tomahawk. Images released by CENTCOM earlier today show at least one black Tomahawk missile being launched, which is something we've never seen before, and might just suggest that these weapons have been given coatings of radar-absorbent material to improve their chances of penetrating whatever remains of Iran's integrated air defenses. Now, the Forward Carrier Strike Group Air Wing 8 includes 4 strike fighter squadrons of FA-18 Super Hornets, along with an additional squadron of the Super Hornets' electronic warfare-focused sibling fighters, the EA-18G Growler, with airborne warning and control E-2D advanced Hawkeyes and 3 squadrons of combat and logistics rotorcraft. The Lincoln, on the other hand, despite being the older carrier, boasts some more advanced fighter options thanks to Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 314, also known as the Black Knights, who operate 5th generation F-35Cs. Now, those stealth fighters fight alongside 3 Navy strike fighter squadrons of FA-18 Super Hornets, another electronic warfare squadron of Growlers, as well as the Hawkeyes and rotorcraft found in other carrier air wings. Now, that massive air power has been further bolstered in the region by more than 120 U.S. Air Force F-35A Lightning IIs, F-22 Raptors, F-15E Strike Eagles, and F-16 Fighting Falcons, along with over 100 air-to-air refueling tankers and another 200 cargo and logistics aircraft. Other airborne assets known to be in the region include at least 1 high-flying U-2 spy plane, E-3 Sentry airborne early warning and control aircraft, MQ-9 Reaper remotely piloted aircraft, and A-10 Thunderbolt II close air support jets, among others. The United States reportedly has something in the neighborhood of 30,000 troops positioned in bases all throughout the Middle East, and the U.S. Central Command's Task Force Scorpion has reportedly also been involved, deploying Lucas one-way attack drones for the first time in combat. All told, this marks the largest massing of American combat assets in the region since 2003 and the invasion of Iraq, but it is vital to note that the 2003 invasion force absolutely dwarfed American forces in the theater today. At the onset of the 2003 invasion, the US-led coalition included more than 1,800 combat aircraft, including 863 American fixed-wing assets, backed by some 250,000 American troops. Now, that's all to say that while the U.S. has a great deal of firepower to bring to bear against Iran's military, it is not currently positioned to mount any sort of large-scale ground offensive, which should come as some relief to the moms and dads of service members throughout the United States. At least for now, the U.S. seems to be keeping this offensive in the air, with apparent plans to cripple the Iranian government sufficiently to enable a burgeoning revolution of the nation's populace. Now, it is not currently clear that there's an organized group with an established leadership hierarchy that would be ready and able to take the Islamist regime's place if and when it falls. If there isn't, toppling the Iranian government could lead to internal conflict and potentially even civil war. Now, that outcome could, in some regards, be seen as accomplishing stated American aims of neutering Iran's nuclear programs and laying waste to its missile production infrastructure. But objectively speaking, that could not be seen as a positive outcome for the Iranian people, and in time could also allow for any number of radical groups to put down roots in the resource-rich nation, inevitably leading to further security concerns just a bit further down the road. Now, as night falls in Iran, it seems likely that American and Israeli airstrikes will only pick up. Most attacks, in fact, tend to start at night, which not only provides the cover of darkness, but also tends to reduce civilian casualties with fewer people out and about. The fact that this attack actually started at daybreak, the start of a workday, may well suggest that the first targets were intended to be decapitation strikes, and the evidence certainly does point that way, wiping out senior military leaders based on current intelligence as to where they would be on a Friday morning, or maybe this particular Friday morning. And that might potentially shine some light as to why this attack started now, right in the midst of talks between Iran and the United States, and predicated on justifications that were just as true 6 months ago as they are today. Iran's nuclear program and its air defense apparatus Both suffered crushing blows in what is now being called the 12-day Iran-Israel war last June, which included American B-2 bomber strikes against Iranian subterranean nuclear facilities. Now, those attacks, combined with ongoing civil unrest within the Iranian population, the fall of a key ally in Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and the degraded capabilities of proxy forces like Hezbollah and the Houthis, have all made Tehran's regime more vulnerable and potentially more desperate than at any other time in recent history. Likewise, despite growing ties with Russia, Moscow cannot afford to come to Iran's aid, just as it couldn't afford to come to Assad's in Syria due to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. So, verifiable intelligence about a large meeting of senior Iranian leaders, for instance, might have presented a rare opportunity to strike what the US and Israel could well hope to be a killing blow for the regime. Now, if that is the case, discussions of Iran's ongoing nuclear efforts may be more about justifying the timing to the American people than they are about a pressing nuclear threat, as reports from the U.S. Director of National Intelligence from 2005 and more recent statements from officials like Secretary of State Marco Rubio all seem to suggest that Iran is no closer to developing a nuclear weapon today than they were following the American strikes on its nuclear facilities last June. Now, that isn't to say that Iran isn't working toward rebuilding its lost nuclear enrichment capacity. Indeed, reports show engineers are continuing to explore ways to dig their destroyed and damaged nuclear facilities out, but it does suggest that the threat may not be immediate, at least the nuclear one. Now, Iran has long been seen as a destabilizing presence in the Middle East, particularly thanks to the efforts of groups like its secretive Quds Force, which is a branch of the elite Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps that is formally tasked with unconventional warfare and military intelligence operations, but could be more informally described as the group Iran uses to directly train, fund, and guide the actions of terror organizations like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Palestine, the Houthis in Yemen, and several more. Now, these militant groups then operate as proxy forces for the Iranian regime, advancing Iran's foreign policy aims through violence while insulating Tehran from direct geopolitical reprisal. As such, saying that Iran provides support and refuge for internationally recognized terrorist organizations would actually be a pretty significant understatement. Iran and the regime ruled by the autocratic Ayatollah Ali Khamenei should be seen as the linchpin in a globe-spanning network of paramilitary factions working toward common goals under the guise of loosely affiliated Islamist groups. But Iran is more than just a center point in a global web of insurgent militias. Despite a struggling domestic economy, Iran's vast oil and gas supplies, which exceed 10% of the world's proven reserves, are certainly enough for the nation to become what some analysts describe as an energy superpower. And as such, even amid significant internal turmoil, Iran's military apparatus is still generally ranked in the top 20 of all nations on Earth, and its gross domestic product, or national buying power, sits comfortably in the top 50, exceeding that of several European allies. Now, this has allowed Iran to invest heavily in two different avenues of military development, using proxied terror groups as an indirect means of force projection abroad, while deepening more formal military ties with like-minded global and regional powers like Russia and China to allow for things like technology transfers for advanced weapons development. And while Iran's funding of terror groups and the wholesale slaughter of its own people are both certainly grounds for deep concern, the most pressing one for decades now has been the nation's ongoing pursuit of nuclear weapons. Now, in the minds of many, preventing Iran from developing nukes isn't about stopping nuclear proliferation, but rather it's about stopping a nuclear first strike. Today, only 9 nations possess nuclear weapons, most of whom see them as diplomatic leverage at best and weapons of last resort at worst. Iran's extremist regime, however, is seen by many as more likely to leverage a nuclear arsenal for offensive strikes rather than just as a means of deterrence. And I do want to be clear, however, that 2024 and 2025 reports from the U.S. Office of the Director of National Intelligence both dispute the idea that Iran's pursuit of a nuclear weapon is in the service of a first strike strategy. Instead, they largely characterize Iran's nuclear efforts as a means of regime survival, effectively using the threat of nuclear strikes to prevent attacks on the nation's leadership, like the ones we're seeing play out today. Now, it is, however, certainly possible that the same recent developments that have made Iran so vulnerable to this attack may have also shifted the regime's priorities and nuclear doctrine toward a more offensive approach. And that uncertainty is, well, indicative of just about everything about this conflict as it begins to unfold. America's stated objectives aren't entirely clear. President Trump has described them as destroying Iran's missile industry, annihilating Iran's navy, ensuring Iran's proxies can no longer destabilize the region, and preventing Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. And those might seem like clear and obvious goals, but the truth is, achieving them would require a much larger operation and almost certainly boots on the ground, which at least so far, it does not seem the Trump administration is ready to do. Those statements, however, could be part of a broader effort to force Iran's capitulation to American and Israeli demands. Sort of tough talk in the art of the deal, if you will. And if I'm right about that, in the days ahead, we'll see waves of attacks against Iran with breaks meant to create opportunities for diplomatic off-ramps that could lead to the end of offensive operations, provided Iran capitulates. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Iran has already launched numerous ballistic missile and drone attacks at American and Israeli bases throughout the region in retaliation, though as of recording this, there have not been any reported American casualties thus far. So, for now, that's where we stand. At the onset of large-scale combat operations against Iran, with the path forward mired in some uncertainty. If you're one of the service members participating in this offensive, stay frosty and stay safe. If you've got a loved one in uniform, trust in them and in their abilities to get through this. And if you're eager to see this conflict come to a swift resolution, you should know that I'm with you. And with that, ends this breaking edition of Firepower from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and merch from all around the force. If you've gotten anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below, and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.